Welcome to the Be Ruthless show, where we have the conversations that other people don't, the conversations that other people won't. I'm your host, Sam Ruth, and I'm ready to make a lot of noise and disrupt things, ruthlessly. Thanks for being here today. Now let's get to it. Welcome back to the Be Ruthless show. I'm your host, Sam Ruth, and joining me today is an amazing guest, Jennifer Mariani, who was born and raised in Harare, Zimbabwe. Her chapbook, All Forgotten Now, published by Off Topic Publishing, debuts this month. Her poetry has been featured all over in places that I can't pronounce, so I'm skipping this part. She's been a guest judge for Off Topic Publishing's monthly poetry contest. Jennifer writes about Africa, both the landscape and being white in post-independent Zimbabwe. She also writes about domestic violence, body image, and eating disorders. She's passionate about sharing her eating disorder recovery with others and is currently working on a poetry collection on the subject. Jennifer currently resides in Calgary, Alberta, with her 2 daughters, 3 cats, and numerous volumes of Pablo Neruda's poetry. She teaches ballet, and her favorite poems are written for her daughters. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
What an amazing story. Tell us, in your own words, a little bit more about you and how you got to writing to heal.
So I had always written. I started writing as a child. And when I was a child, I wrote fiction mostly because I was a child and it was interesting to me. I was very lucky in that I had a mum who read to me, who gave me the gift of literature, who gave me the gift of words. And my mum had a lot of poetry. And so often if I was sick, she'd sit on the end of my bed. And I remember this beautiful little red hardbound book that she used to read a lot of classics and romantics to me. So, I had an interest in poetry from a young age. And I found as I got older through my teen years and 20s that I really enjoyed writing poetry. It was a way for me to express myself. At the time, it was just something I did for me. I would have a thought, I would write a poem. And, I just, back in the day, I used to just handwrite them and collect them in a binder. And in my 20s, I also did some blogging about my eating disorder. There's a huge community out there that I found that so I could tell my story and talk about my struggles. I was still really sick at the time. So it was a place to connect with other people and to tell my story and just to write a bit. And then I had my girls in my mid-30s. And after having babies a year apart, I wasn't writing anymore because it was a busy time in my life. And I found that I missed it. And when COVID came about here in Calgary and everything shut down, I was laid off from my ballet teaching job. And so I was home with my girls and they were a little bit older. And I thought, I'd really like to revisit writing. I think in my mind, it was something I had to have this time to sit down and focus and do, which I no longer had as a mum. And so I've sort of realized as a mum that there are ways to do things. The way that the time is divvied up might just be a little bit different. It might be 5 minutes here or there. It might be 10 if I'm lucky. So I did get back to writing during COVID and I joined a group here in Canada on Facebook called Canada Writes. And I found a wonderful community of writers. I started submitting some of my poetry to some literary journals online. And my poetry was picked up and published in a few places, which was startling to me because I wasn't really expecting that response. And then one of the people that I met through the Canada Writes was Mariani. She's the editor-in-chief at Off Topic Publishing. And she saw a poem that had been published by the League of Canadian Poets called Land Lost with My Childhood. And she approached me and said, I would like to include that in an anthology I'm doing about people who cross borders. The anthology was called Wanderers. And I said, oh, that would be nice. And then she said, also, would you consider publishing a collection of just your work? And so that was really exciting for me because no one had ever offered that before. And I was kind of new to the publishing side of poetry and having other people read my work. So that's a little bit about how I'm having a book launch this month, a chapbook called All Forgotten Now.
So amazing. And it's very similar to most people like myself. We write for ourselves with no idea that there's really other people out there that need to hear it.
Exactly.
So you mentioned a few times in your 20s when you were struggling, you found a group. In your 30s or now when you were writing, you found a group. And I think connection is such a huge, huge piece. But people really deep into struggle are often afraid of that and isolate and don't know that there's other people who get it out there. So especially with an eating disorder? How did you find that?
Well, yeah, it is interesting. I think eating disorders by their nature, they're secretive. You have this horrible cycle that you live in where you're constantly trying to hide your behaviors. You're trying to hide your struggle. I was a functioning adult. I was a professional teacher at a professional school. And, I'm telling my students, you need to eat well, you need to take care of yourself. But I was not able to do that for myself. And so it was interesting to be able to connect through writing about my eating disorder with an online community. I think the web has really just opened up places for connection that maybe before we wouldn't have been able to find. And, I started just doing a little bit of blogging, and I found people would be emailing me and contacting me and say, I'm suffering too, and this really resonates with me. And I think some of it was just that way that you could connect with somebody else and realize that you're not alone in your suffering.
What if they're not doing their own writing that people will see and contact them? I'm thinking of people who don't know where to turn and aren't ready to pick up the phone and say, I need help, and make an actual appointment with a professional, but can truly benefit from others going through it. Do they just search eating disorder groups?
I don't know. At the time when I was writing, I think there was a sense of support in the community. I would say in some ways, a lot of us were still immersed in the eating disorder, struggling, suffering. And so whilst it was a place to connect and find somebody who could listen to you and say, I understand that struggle, I have that too, I want healing for you, even if I can't achieve it. I do think that professional help is important. One thing with the eating disorders is we like to read memoirs, we like to read everything there is to read about them, we like to read all this online content. And in some ways that can also be triggering in itself. You realize, well, there's other people doing this, so I can continue down this path. And you're sort of in this pseudo, you're sick and you're talking about how you want to get well, but you're not actually taking the steps towards it. So, it's one of those double-edged things. I think there's a lovely sense of connection, a lovely sense of support, knowing that you're not alone in your suffering, that your story resonates with other people and you hear their stories too. But I think I would recommend for anybody who is struggling with body image, disordered eating, full-blown eating disorder, certainly get professional help.
How did you, as a ballet teacher, keep these two lives completely separate? Because from my perception, that's a risky field for eating disorders, but we all know that they can hit anyone, anywhere. But I just think that you are constantly being watched and told all sorts of things. I couldn't do ballet. So tell me, how did you do it in that environment?
I think the environment in itself for somebody who is prone to an eating disorder, poor body image, we're highly perfectionistic by nature in the ballet world. It seems to be a personality trait that goes with the territory. I think we're very vulnerable as artists because our body is our tool. So if it is not quite right, it's not that there's something wrong with your tools, there's something wrong with you and you need to fix it. So I think in my mind, I thought I was doing a pretty good job of, I wasn't hugely outspoken at the time. I think, there were people close to me who knew that I suffered. And obviously, colleagues, students, people could see my weight was yo-yoing. I suffered from anorexia. I suffered from bulimia. There were times in there that I tried to get well and recover. My weight would go up, it would go down, it would go more down. There were comments that would be made by people at work. So I think it was being seen. People would comment about what I was eating or comment about what I looked like, whether it was I was too thin or I was looking voluptuous, which is nothing that a ballet teacher wants to hear. So, I think in my mind, I was trying very hard to keep my professional persona at work and keep my suffering separate from that. I think when it's your body and it's on view every day, even as a teacher in front of mirrors, in front of students, around colleagues, I think the reality is that a lot of it can be seen.
I can't imagine being around mirrors all the time. And I'm trying to think of someone who doesn't have a body image, like a body image issue, not a disorder, but I don't think any of us look in the mirror and see what other people see. And in my own experience, I can go back to years that I was unhappy with myself. And I look at pictures now and I'm like, my God, I was tiny, but you can't see it in the moment.
Yeah, I think that's hard. I think body dysmorphia is something that, whether it's to a greater or lesser degree, is something that's very real. I talk to mostly females, my female friends that I speak to, and I think diet culture, really growing up in the 80s, I think it was a huge injustice, this diet culture that everyone just grew up completely immersed in. We saw our mums, going to calisthenics or Slim You Slim, or basically like a Weight Watchers sort of thing, and no one was worried then about the impact that it was having on young girls. I feel like there wasn't that awareness that there is today. As a mom, I don't comment on my body in front of my children in a negative way. I may not be happy with the weight that I've recovered to, and that's something that is a daily struggle for me to deal with. But around my children, we talk about how God made bodies all different shapes, all different sizes, and a body is just a body. It's neutral. We're looking for that. There's a lot of body positivity out there, which is great. And in some ways, I'm looking more just for that body neutrality. Let's just get past being hyper focused on bodies.
Amen. You mentioned diet culture, and while it shifted, I feel like it's still part. I'm a vegetarian and I am constantly mocked playfully, but people poke at what I eat or what I don't eat.
Yeah.
And nobody knows how dangerous that can be.
Exactly. I think, and I'm also a vegetarian, happened since I was 12. And I remember that there was a lot of pushback from my parents against that. And I grew up where, people ate meat. It just wasn't one of those things that you just woke up and decided you didn't eat animals because it was cruel. It was mocked. I was laughed at. People poked fun at me eating carrots and hummus and that kind of thing. But, I think that's another thing that people have to learn, is that we are trying to shift, but there's still so much culture where it's just acceptable to comment on what people are eating, how much they're eating, what they look like, as opposed to who they are. I remember when I was pregnant and I was trying very hard to be well recovered from my eating disorder, and people would touch my body. And I was thinking, people, there is still, I think we're trying to shift. It's just not happening fast enough. People comment on you and you think, my body is not up for debate. My body is not up for commentary. My body is my story to tell. And, I think the shift is there, but it's coming really slowly.
And you mentioned that people would comment if you were too thin. I've had clients who are just naturally small and have been teased or picked on or bullied even their entire school time for being that way, and they eat everything to try to gain weight and they can't. So it's not just one side or the other, but I think the world is more understanding of being overweight or obese and not eating, as opposed to people who are struggling just as much to gain a pound, and it is a struggle for them.
Mm-hmm. I went to an interesting story about that. I went to a ballet school in England to pursue my ballet teaching career. And I was only 18 when I left. I left my family in Zimbabwe, moved to a different country. I did have family in England, but I was alone in Manchester. I was at ballet school, which was a dream for me. But I was sick with anorexia and bulimia. I also at that point had undiagnosed hypothyroidism. So I was bigger than what you would expect a ballet dancer to be, especially somebody who's immersed in an eating disorder. And I just thought to myself, I must not be very good at this. I'm obviously not doing anorexia or bulimia right, because I'm not getting any thinner. But I was at school. One of my best friends in my first year was so thin, so waif-like, and she wasn't sick, but everyone was concerned about her. And I remember her being called into the principal's office and them telling her, like, you have to gain weight. We can't have you around here with an eating disorder. And she would say to me, I don't have an eating disorder. And there I was, by comparison, I didn't look unwell. And I needed help and I needed attention. I was only 18 years old, but nobody looked because, it's one of those things where we worry about people if they're thin. And we do have an understanding of, it's harder to be overweight. It's a struggle losing weight. But there was so much focus on this friend of mine because she was just so naturally very thin. And, I think we're also looking for a type. We're looking for a body type to identify an eating disorder. And we know that eating disorders affect everyone, regardless of, color, size. It doesn't matter. We can't wait to see somebody being thin before we're ready to say, I think that person's sick.
And you've said it a few times. You're looking at the body, not at the person or the behavior. So you were struggling. Nobody was looking at the inside.
No, and I was ashamed. I was like, well, I'm not going to tell somebody I have an eating disorder because I'm not getting any thinner, which was kind of the point as a ballet dancer. I mean, there was a lot about anxiety and control. There's a lot of other factors other than just trying to be thin. But I do remember thinking it's kind of embarrassing to tell people that you have an eating disorder when you're actually overweight.
That's an interesting piece. But you'll never see yourself accurately. So who's the first person you let in?
Well, it's hard to say. I think, like when I was younger, when I was in my early teenage years, like obviously my parents knew I was unwell. As an adult, it was different. There were a few friends who were close enough to know that I struggled. And I think I sort of downplayed it because, I didn't want them to think I was crazy. Didn't want them to think my life was out of control. Didn't want them to think I needed some kind of intervention or help. I did go to something in my 30s called Freedom Session through my church, which is kind of like an AA, where you can take any addiction that you have and work through it there. And I thought, well, it's probably time to work on this eating disorder. And I met a very good friend actually through that program. I did not continue the program. I dropped out of it. It wasn't for me for many reasons. And this friend was somebody who was probably the first adult friend who got to see all the facets of my eating disorder. I'd had boyfriends, I'd had partners, and they knew there was something wrong with me. They knew I wasn't well. They would ask questions like, were you throwing up? Like, why aren't you eating? But I never spoke to them about it. So I think this girlfriend was probably the person who really got to know all the ugly, gruesome details. She had also suffered with an eating disorder. She was at the group with binge eating disorder. She'd had anorexia when she was younger. So I think there was some kinship there. I felt like, she was one of my people. She understood. So I could tell her all the ugly, disgusting, shameful side of my eating disorder, and she wouldn't judge me. And I think that's the thing, you don't want to tell people, you don't want them judging you. Are you crazy? It's gross, it's very hard, shameful kind of secret that you keep.
And you met her by going to your church, which is a place you felt safe. So anyone listening, who in your life, who in your current, you don't have to reach out to somebody new that's a complete stranger. What support do you have that you might feel safe taking that first baby step? So even though it didn't work, you still got something extremely meaningful out of it. And I'm assuming she's still in your life.
She is still in my life. She is godmother to my youngest daughter. She's still in my life. She's a wonderful friend. And, she really did help me when I got her. She encouraged me to see my doctor and get a referral to the Calgary Eating Disorders program. And I really, in your mind, sometimes you want to be well, you want to enjoy your life. I knew I wanted to have children at some point, and I knew it was affecting me negatively, and it was affecting my work life. It was affecting my home life. It was affecting my health very badly. And so she encouraged me to get this referral. She said, it will take time. You've got time to think about it. And then I wanted to back out of going to they did kind of like an informational session. And she came with me, like literally held my hand, sat with me because I didn't want to go. And I was very childish and very moody and very sort of like, I don't want to be here, And so, yeah, this was somebody who was willing to actually walk down the road of recovery with me, which is a very special thing to have. I'm not sure if it's because she herself had an eating disorder. She's a mental health nurse by trade. So she has a really deep understanding of these things. And I do think, at other points in my life, I could have opened up to a colleague. I could have opened up to other friends. I have a lot of people who are kind, loving friends. And I could have said to them, I'm really struggling and I don't know what to do. And I think there may have been more people who would have been willing to help, but she was the right person at the right time.
Absolutely. A lot of my clients' parents could be listening, and they have big fears about having a child with an eating disorder interact with another child with an eating disorder.
Yeah.
They don't see that potential for the help and connection that they worry that it could be the opposite. Ideas of how to not eat and not get all of those things. So how can we bridge that? There is that risk. I'm not going to minimize that. It happens, but the connection of somebody who gets it, nobody else can give them that.
That again is one of those really hard, it's the two sides of the coin. I remember when I was younger, when I first started with anorexia, I was friends with the girls that I danced with in my studio, and they talked about what they ate or that they threw up, or any connection about the eating disorder was really is that trading of information, so that you learned how to do it and how to do it better and how to do it well. So it is one of those things that I think it is difficult. I think you need a lot of help on all sides there, but people also don't want to feel alone. They do want that connection. They do want somebody who understands what they're going through. And I would say it's one of those things that I don't know who would monitor that. If parents would have to monitor that, depending on the children's age, if whoever's helping with the professional treatment would have to monitor that. We need connection, we need support, we need someone in our life who understands. When I found my friend, I was already in my early 30s. We were adults, and she just said to me, I'll support you. She's like, whether you're not eating or you're eating and throwing up, but along the way, she just kept encouraging me to get help. And when I would say things like, I don't believe that you can actually recover from this, I think this is just a lifelong thing that you manage. Sometimes it's better, sometimes it's worse. She would always just say, I'm holding hope for you. If you
That's
can't,
hugely important to anybody listening that might be struggling, even if you're just counting calories, but it's consuming you. There is a genuine fear that if you get help, you'll be forced to gain weight. And she said, don't worry about that. We just want people to reach out and not go through things alone. And there is a fear that we are going to give you a nutritional plan that you must monitor. It's not that way, is it?
It's not. I would say it's different when we're looking at younger children. I would say anyone under the age of 18. We know that the sooner an eating disorder is treated, the higher the chance of recovery. The longer it goes on, the harder it is. And we also know that there's a greater chance of success the sooner that somebody gets help or treatment. So, and I think, when it does come to what I would term children, young people, I would say they probably need more medical intervention, particularly if their health or well-being is at stake. And that's a hard thing. Sometimes it's a little gentler than that, depending on where you are. I know when I went to eating disorder treatment as an adult, which was the first time I'd actually gone to an eating disorder treatment program in my life. I'd seen various counselors, a lot of them very unhelpful. And this was really, obviously, this is a program designed for eating disorders, and I wasn't put in a program. I wasn't in a stay. I wasn't in, they did have a nutritionist I could speak to. They had somebody who would go shopping with me if I needed help going to get clothes in a different size. I got pregnant, and that was really the main catalyst for recovering from my eating disorder. And I was upset about the fact that I needed a different bra size. And so they had somebody who would go and support you in doing that. And, those kind of things are really wonderful along the way. You have the option, somebody who will come with you and help you with something that's difficult. And yeah, so it's not all hospitalization and feeding tubes and, nutritional plans. I think that is when somebody is in some kind of medical distress, and those kind of interventions are necessary sometimes.
Absolutely. But when it comes to finding who you work with, there are different approaches, and finding somebody that aligns with your beliefs, with your hopes for recovery is really important. I am never going to tell somebody they must eat broccoli. If you don't want broccoli, don't, I'm not, but there are people who might.
Yeah.
So um, even just finding that person to help you find the right person.
Yes. And, I think that is it. It has to be the right time. It has to be the right person. I had gone and seen some other counselors or therapists at some time in my life to find some help. And maybe because of my insurance, they weren't necessarily an eating disorder therapist or counselor. And so, I remember sitting in an office with a man that my insurance company found me. And no disrespect to men, he did not understand at all what I was going through. And his suggestion was that every hour I practiced some breathing exercises. And I remember leaving there thinking that was more trauma than it was worth.
Absolutely.
I sometimes am worried that this eating disorder might kill me. And his approach is that, because I'm anxious and highly strung and experiencing distress that I'm controlling with an eating disorder, I should sit and breathe every hour on the hour, which I can't necessarily do when I'm teaching ballet.
And it's a great tool. I use it all the time, but not when somebody's coming in a crisis and looking for something else. So that is also part of the problem. People have however many bad experiences before they find the right person. But you are entitled to say, I want a female. I want somebody who's been through this, or who has a family member who's been through this. So I feel like they understand my language. You have all of that. You can say you want somebody tall. Really it's up to you. So that's what I help a lot of people while they're looking understand, is that we don't just decide. You're interviewing them. And I don't think the world understands that yet.
Yeah. And, I wish when I was younger in my 20s that I had called my insurance company back and said, this person is not a good fit. Yes, I get 6 covered sessions with them or 8 covered sessions, but if I'm in some kind of crisis, telling me to breathe is not great. And maybe there is somebody out there who is more specialized in eating disorders or who has more understanding of it. So I think that is the thing, that at some point you are advocating for your own health, and you have to find that person that fits for you. And, for everybody, that's going to be different.
And you said it's not a linear, it's reminding me of grief. It's not a linear, you work through these things and then poof, all gone. It's still something you struggle with internally.
Yeah. I struggle every day. I've been well now for this October will be 7 years, so 6.5 years. And every day I have the struggle. I have constant thoughts from the eating disorder. I have a lot of, I still have body image issues, and I eat well. I take care of myself. I move in a way that feels good to me. I no longer exercise obsessively. So if I feel like gentle movement, that's what I do. And if I don't want to move, I don't move, because movement for me used to be one of those things that had to be done. So I do all the things to take care of myself. It doesn't mean I don't struggle with the other things.
I think that's also important, because I do want people to know that it's not a magic pill or anything. You can't just snap your fingers and have it gone. It is
No.
something you have to work through ongoing.
Yeah, I think that is the thing, is it's ongoing. And, I think you can get some very intensive support or treatment at different times. And I think for a lot of people, maybe they need a care plan going forward, like once they've moved out of that, or, just even realizing that maybe it's been a couple of years and you've done well, but maybe it's time to go back and speak to somebody again, or to get more help, to get more support, just because it's something that, again, it's lonely. I don't necessarily say to anybody, oh, I had these thoughts today, I'm really struggling with my body image, I'm really struggling with my weight, I'm really struggling with how I feel, and this thought keeps coming back to me again. I think you have to be very aware, and you have to stay on top of it, because it is a very slippery slope.
I often say that, we take our cars in for tune-ups. We have to charge things so the batteries don't run out, and we need to do the same things for the inside. So if you ever would reach out to somebody and say, I'm struggling, I'm having these thoughts, that's such progress, because people can then be there for you. It's these invisible things that no one knows we're dealing with.
Yes, and I think that's the thing. And I think, we do have to have that awareness just when we're talking to people. That's why I'm so interested in people just having awareness and being more educated on it. You don't make comments about what people look like, because you don't know what they're struggling with.
Or what they're eating, for that matter. I mean, you say it to somebody who has a struggle, you have no idea what they go through after. So I can play it off, but it's really kind of annoying that the whole world makes fun of vegetarians. Right? There's a lot of people, I just don't like meat. Doesn't agree with me. I've never liked it. Doesn't make me a bad person.
Yeah, it is interesting. I've been a vegetarian since I was 12. I'll be 40 this year. And it was one of those things that, it's just, I don't know why it's such a free for all, on vegetarians. It's such a strange thing. If somebody says to you, I don't like Brussels sprouts, you don't make fun of them, because, I also don't like Brussels sprouts. I'm a vegetarian, and there are some vegetables that are not my favorite.
Really? Who knew? Does the writing help? Is that one of your tools? Or is that just part, you've always been a writer and you choose to write about things that are difficult?
No, I would say the writing helps. For me, it's that process of dealing with whatever it is that I'm feeling, whatever it is that I'm going through, a way for me to, unravel all the threads of whatever it is. And, life is complex. There's a lot going on. Last year my dad died, and I found that writing was a way for me to, deal with that grief. And it wasn't for anybody else. It was for myself. I wrote a lot of poems on death. I wrote a lot of poems on dying. It brought up a lot of things from my childhood that I wanted to go back and look at. So I do find that writing is very helpful. I've been working on a collection of poetry about eating disorders. And before, I had always thought, well, if I wrote about eating disorders, it would have to be a memoir or and I thought, well, that's not the kind of writer that I am. And it never crossed my mind that I could write in the genre that I write in, but about eating disorders.
I'm sorry about your dad. There's no words, but I love that getting it out is being addressed, because I think when we keep anything in, whatever it is, it stews and it festers and it isn't healthy. So if people listening aren't ready to make that step and talk to anybody, you can give writing a shot. You can burn it. You can tear it up. Nobody has to read it. But I would love if you'd be willing to share one of the poems for the book that's coming out. Anybody listening on the 18th?
Yeah, so this book that's coming out right now is called All Forgotten Now. And this book in particular is a collection of poetry based around Zimbabwe, which is where I was born, where I was raised. And this collection in itself is dealing with, the grief and loss of leaving home. I termed it self-imposed exile from my homeland, which was experiencing a lot of political turmoil when I left. And it goes back through my memories of home. There's places in the poetry where I talk about the racism and the poverty that happened in Zimbabwe. And as the book progresses, the kind of arc of it changes, and it's more about trying to belong somewhere else. I have chosen to settle here in Canada, and I've had my children here in Canada. So there's a lot of grief and a lot of loss explored in the poem. But I'm going to read you a poem that's more about how I have come to have a different connection to the land that I've chosen to settle in, because I've had children here and because my children belong here. How does that change my sense of belonging? So the poem that I'm going to read is from a collection of poetry for my children called Star and Song. These mountains are not mine, but they belong to my children. They will hear the valleys and the rivers call to them as I do not. They will yearn for this Arctic sun as I for an African one, and they will call this land home, though I will never rest here. They will hear the singing voices of these people as I hear in my heart the songs of dirt roads and bougainvillea and September skies lost to me. My children will stand firm upon this land, and when they belong to it, I will remember that I belong to them, and I am entirely at home when their faces shine on me.
So beautiful. Thank you for sharing with everyone. And that touched me. I just told you before we started recording that I moved recently, but I moved from Michigan to Colorado in 2014. And nobody knows the struggle that goes with leaving home. And I didn't leave the country, but this is the first place I've lived since then that feels like home. I just said that this morning. So that touched me deeply.
Thank you.
How can people connect with you and learn more and get the book?
So the best way to connect with me is through the publisher's website. So I'll send you links for that. It is called offtopicpublishing.com/books. We'll take you to the pre-order page. The book is available as a chapbook, and it's also available as an ebook. So that's a really easy way to get a copy of it. We are launching on the 18th. There is contact information for me on the publisher's website. We also have an Instagram, Off Topic Publishing, which I'm on a lot. So there's ways to connect with me that way.
We'll put all of that in the show notes. And what if somebody connected with your journey? What if somebody wants to reach out with an eating disorder or a question, not necessarily about poetry?
They can also send that. I have the contact@offtopicpublishing.com email address. So they're welcome to contact me that way, and they can reach out about anything, whether it's connecting with the poetry about home, or they want to talk about eating disorder or the writing process. Welcome to email me that way. And that's contact@offtopicpublishing.com.
And again, I'll put all of that in the show notes, or you can reach out to me if you can't find it. Any final thoughts for everyone listening?
I think that I would say, find ways to cope with where you are in life, and whether that's writing, whether that's art, whatever it is that is an outlet for what you're going through, and find people that you can connect with, because there are people out there who love you and who care for you, and there are people there who won't judge you, who will take you by the hand and say, I'll help you down this road.
Thank you so much for sharing your story and your time with us. Cannot wait for the release on the 18th. Please let me know how I can support that. And until next time, everyone listening, always be ruthless. Thanks so much for listening today. Your support means everything to me, truly. If this podcast resonates with you, please do me a favor and join in the Ruthless movement by making some noise and doing one of these 4 things. Subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Tell a friend so we can break stigmas even faster. Leave a review so people can see what you think of the show. And last, if you want to learn more about me and be a part of the Grief Hab community, please head on over to the Facebook group. We'd love to have you. Thanks again for spending your time with us, and see you next week.